Imagine an emperor so unpredictable that senators feared attending his meetings. Families locked their doors at night, and even Rome's most loyal soldiers whispered in fear. This was Gaius, Julius Caesar Augustus, Germanicus better known as Caligula. To the world he began as a golden prince, loved by the Roman people, but he would go down in history as one of the most notorious, dangerous, and unhinged rulers Rome had ever seen. How did a young man, born into a respected military family, become remembered as a monster who declared himself a god, humiliated his senators, and turned the mighty Roman Empire into his personal playground of madness? Let's begin. The childhood of a future emperor. Caligula was born in 12 AD, son of Germanicus, Rome's most celebrated general, and Agrippina, the elder, a woman of noble blood. From the start, the Roman people adored him. As a toddler, he often accompanied his father on military campaigns. Soldiers gave him a nickname, Caligula, meaning little boots, because he wore miniature versions of their military sandals. It was a term of affection, a cute reminder that the boy was seen as the army's child. But behind this affectionate name, his early life was anything but stable. His father Germanicus died under suspicious circumstances when Caligula was just 7 years old, and he whispered that the powerful emperor Tiberius, jealous and paranoid, had ordered his death. Afterward, his mother and brothers were accused of treason and either executed or exiled. Caligula survived only because he was still a child, but he grew up surrounded by blood, betrayal, and fear. Imagine being raised in a palace where every smile could hide a dagger, and every meal might be poisoned. This was the world that shaped young Caligula. Life under Emperor Tiberius. Eventually, Caligula was summoned to live with Emperor Tiberius on the island of Capri. To many, this might sound like a luxury. But Capri was infamous as Tiberius's private den of cruelty, excess, and suspicion. Historians describe Tiberius as a cold, paranoid ruler who executed anyone he suspected of disloyalty. For 6 years, Caligula lived under his watch, forced to hide his true feelings, pretending to be loyal while silently watching others fall victim to the emperor's paranoia. Some ancient writers even suggest that Caligula learned cruelty here, witnessing acts of torture and perversion that would later echo in his own reign.
Ow.
But Caligula was clever. He knew how to play the part of a humble, obedient servant. He survived when so many others perished, waiting patiently for his chance at power. The sudden rise to power in 37 AD, Tiberius finally died, leaving Rome in need of a new emperor. At that moment, Caligula was just 24 years old. The Roman people adored him. He was the son of Germanicus, the war hero, and the grandson of beloved leaders. When he entered Rome, crowds cheered his name. Senators welcomed him as a savior after the long, oppressive years under Tiberius. At first, Caligula seemed like everything Rome hoped for. He freed political prisoners, reduced taxes, and gave generous gifts to the people. Public games and gladiatorial shows filled the city. For a brief moment, Rome believed it had found a kind, just ruler. But then something changed. The illness that transformed him. After just a few months on the throne, Caligula fell gravely ill. Some say it was poison. Others believe it was natural disease. Whatever the cause, he hovered near death. When he recovered, Rome breathed a sigh of relief. Its young emperor had survived.
Right.
But those close to him noticed a terrifying transformation.
Ow.
Gone was the generous prince. In his place emerged a man consumed by cruelty, paranoia, and reckless ambition. Historians often debate whether this illness damaged his mind or if it simply gave him the freedom to unleash the darker side he had always hidden. Whatever the truth, Caligula's reign would soon spiral into chaos unlike anything Rome had ever seen. The first signs of madness. Caligula began spending money recklessly, draining the empire's treasury on extravagant games, feasts, and personal luxuries. He declared himself not just emperor, but a living god, demanding temples and statues in his honor. Senators were horrified, but they dared not oppose him openly. To criticize Caligula was to invite execution. He would humiliate Rome's leaders, forcing them to run alongside his chariot or kiss his feet. And yet, for Caligula, this was only the beginning. The once beloved little boots, the Roman army, was now stepping into the shoes of a tyrant whose cruelty would become legendary. This was the making of Rome's mad emperor. But the true depths of his insanity, the shocking acts of violence, humiliation, and bizarre fantasies, were still to come. We'll uncover how Caligula turned Rome into a stage for his madness. From bizarre feasts and cruel executions to the infamous stories that made his name echo through history, Caligula no longer wanted to be seen as a mere man. He demanded worship as a living god. Temples once built for Jupiter or Apollo were repurposed for him. Statues of gods had their heads removed, replaced with his own likeness. Imagine walking through Rome and seeing the mighty figure of Zeus, but with Caligula's face staring back at you. He dressed himself in divine costumes, sometimes as Apollo with a lyre, sometimes as Mercury with a cloak, even as Venus, the goddess of love, wearing women's clothing. He wasn't simply mocking tradition, he was rewriting it, bending Rome's sacred religion to his own ego. For senators, this was humiliating. Rome had always respected its gods and its traditions. Now their emperor demanded sacrifices not to Jupiter or Mars, but to himself. Citizens were forced to bow before his statues. Priests were ordered to treat him as divine. To resist was treason. The humiliation of senators Caligula seemed to take special pleasure in tormenting Rome's Senate. He mocked their authority, stripped them of dignity, and forced them into degrading acts. One story tells of how he invited senators to a lavish banquet. They expected political discussion. Instead, Caligula burst into laughter and declared, "I could have you all executed right now, and no one would dare stop me." He left them shaking in silence, unsure if he was joking. At other times, he made senators run beside his chariot like slaves or kiss his feet in public. Some were ordered to wait tables during his feasts, pouring wine and serving food while Caligula laughed at their humiliation. Rome's highest officials, men from noble families, were reduced to clowns for the emperor's amusement. The bizarre projects Caligula's madness wasn't limited to humiliation, extended to wild, expensive projects. One of the most famous was his bridge of boats. He ordered hundreds of ships to be tied together across the Bay of Bai, creating an artificial floating bridge over 2 miles long. Why? Because a soothsayer had once told him he had no more chance of becoming emperor than of riding a horse across the Bay of Bai. To prove the prophecy wrong, Caligula rode his horse across the man-made bridge. Wearing the armor of Alexander the Great, this grand spectacle drained resources, disrupted naval activity, and left many Romans baffled. But to Caligula, it was proof of his power, the power to defy prophecy, the power to command nature itself. Another project was even stranger. He supposedly planned to build a giant palace that would connect directly to the temple of Jupiter, so that gods and emperors could live side by side. Some say he even wanted to move the capital of the empire to Alexandria in Egypt, where rulers were worshipped as divine. The infamous horse. Perhaps the most infamous story of Caligula involves his beloved horse, Incitatus. Ancient writers claim that Caligula adored this animal more than most humans. He gave the horse a marble stable, ivory manger, purple blankets, and even a house with servants. But that wasn't enough. Caligula supposedly planned to make Incitatus a concetus, a highest political office in Rome. Some historians believe this was not literal, but a cruel joke. By suggesting that even a horse could serve as consul, Caligula was mocking the Senate, saying, "You are so useless. I could replace you with an animal," whether true or exaggerated. The story captures the spirit of Caligula's reign. One part cruelty, one part absurdity, all wrapped in arrogance. The world of fear and violence behind the laughter and bizarre antics, there was also terror. Caligula's cruelty knew no limits. He delighted in executions, often turning them into entertainment. During gladiatorial games, he ordered prisoners to be thrown to wild beasts without proper weapons, simply to watch them die. At times when there weren't enough criminals available, he had innocent bystanders dragged from the crowd and executed to keep the show going. He also had a sadistic streak. Ancient accounts describe him enjoying the sight of suffering, watching torture sessions, and laughing at the pain of others. For the families of Rome's elite, every day was filled with dread would they fall victim to the emperor's wrath. The scandals of the palace. Caligula's personal life was just as shocking. He openly flaunted relationships that scandalized Roman society. Rumors spread that he had affairs with his own sisters, particularly Drusilla, whom he reportedly loved obsessively. Some sources claim he even considered making her his official wife. When Drusilla died unexpectedly, Caligula was devastated. He ordered a period of public mourning, as if she were the empress. Statues were erected in her honor, and some say he even declared her a goddess. But whispers of incest haunted his reputation forever. He also treated marriage as a game. One notorious story tells how, at a banquet, Caligula saw a senator's wife, admired her beauty, and demanded she sit beside him. In front of the entire gathering, he kissed her, took her to his chambers, and returned later to declare her unworthy. The senator could do nothing. His wife was at the mercy of the emperor's whim. The drain of the treasury, all of this extravagance came at a price. The treasury that had been full at the start of Caligula's reign soon ran dry. He had wasted fortunes on games, spectacles, palaces, and personal luxuries. When money grew scarce, he resorted to extreme measures. He raised taxes to crushing levels, auctioned off the lives of gladiators, even forced families to give him portions of their inheritance. Rich men were accused of crimes so that their wealth could be confiscated. Rome, once thriving under the promise of a young emperor, was now financially bleeding under the weight of his excess. The turning point by now, the people who had once adored him were losing patience. Senators despised him, soldiers were uneasy, and even the Praetorian Guard, the elite bodyguards sworn to protect him, began to whisper. Caligula was only a few years into his reign, but already the seeds of betrayal were being planted. His arrogance, cruelty, and reckless spending had turned allies into enemies. The emperor believed himself untouchable, a god above mortals. But in Rome, history had proven one truth again and again. No emperor, no matter how powerful, was ever truly safe. Power built on fear is never stable. For a while, Caligula's cruelty kept Rome silent. But silence does not mean loyalty. Behind the palace walls, daggers were being sharpened. Whispers of betrayal grew louder. The man who called himself a god was about to learn that even gods could bleed. By 40 AD, just 3 years into his reign, Caligula had already alienated nearly every group in Roman society. The Senate despised him for constant humiliation and insults. The nobility feared losing their wealth to his false accusations. The common people, once showered with games and feasts, now suffered under heavy taxes. Even the Praetorian Guard, whose duty was to protect the emperor, grew weary of his arrogance. Caligula believed he was untouchable. He mocked Rome's traditions, drained its treasury, and flaunted his excesses. But with every insult, he added fuel to the fire of conspiracy. Strange declarations, one of Caligula's most dangerous moves, was his treatment of foreign policy. He declared wars in the strangest ways. In one campaign, he led his soldiers to the shores of the English Channel. The troops expected to cross into Britain, but Caligula suddenly ordered them to stop and collect seashells. He declared that the seashells were the spoils of war against Neptune, the god of the sea. The soldiers were baffled, humiliated, and angry. To risk their lives for a meaningless gesture revealed how unstable their emperor truly was. Caligula's paranoia extended even to his own family. He executed relatives he suspected of disloyalty, including cousins and in-laws. His surviving sisters, once close to him, were eventually exiled or disgraced. The emperor, who once inspired Rome with the promise of unity, had now turned his own blood into enemies. The turning point came when Caligula's behavior crossed even the limits of Rome's tolerance. He began threatening senators openly, boasting of executing them in public. He confiscated wealth shamelessly, leaving noble families desperate. He also insulted the Praetorian Guard, treating them like servants instead of elite protectors. This was a fatal mistake. An emperor could insult senators and nobles and survive, but when he lost the loyalty of the men guarding his life, his days were numbered. The conspiracy, a group of senators, nobles, and officers from the Praetorian Guard, secretly came together. At the center of the plot was Cassius Chaerea, a tribune in the guard. Chaerea had long suffered Caligula's insults. The emperor mocked his voice as weak and feminine, calling him names in front of soldiers. For a proud officer, the humiliation was unbearable. Revenge grew in his heart. The conspirators decided the time had come. Caligula's arrogance had created too many enemies. Rome could not survive under his rule. He had to die. It was January 24th, 41 AD. Caligula was preparing to leave a theater performance in the Palatine Games. The atmosphere was festive, and the emperor, as always, believed himself adored. As he made his way through a corridor beneath the palace, Sharia and his men struck. The first blow came. Suddenly his sword plunged into Caligula's neck. Shock spread across his face. He tried to cry out, but more daggers followed. Soldiers, senators, and officers stabbed him again and again. Ancient sources claim he received over 30 wounds before collapsing. The god emperor lay on the ground, bleeding like any mortal man. But the conspirators were not finished. They hunted down Caligula's wife, Caesonia, and killed her. His infant daughter was also murdered, smashed against a wall, according to some accounts. The goal was clear: erase Caligula's bloodline, end the madness forever. For a brief moment, Rome was leaderless. Chaos erupted. Citizens feared civil war. Had the empire collapsed with the death of its mad emperor? In the confusion, soldiers searched the palace. Behind a curtain, they found a trembling man, Claudius, Caligula's uncle. Claudius had always been underestimated. Considered weak, clumsy, and stammering, no one thought he could rule. But in that moment, the Praetorian Guard saw an opportunity. They declared Claudius emperor. Rome, hungry for stability, after years of terror, accepted. The Senate hesitated, some wishing to restore the Republic, but the Guard's swords made the choice clear. Rome would continue with emperors. So, what do we make of Caligula? Some historians argue that ancient sources exaggerated his madness. Writers like Suetonius and Cassius Dio painted him as a monster, but both wrote decades later, relying on gossip and rumor. Perhaps some of the wildest stories, like marrying his horse, were jokes twisted into legends. Yet even if only half of the accounts are true, Caligula remains one of history's darkest examples of absolute power. He turned Rome into his playground, destroyed trust in government, and ruled through fear and humiliation. For centuries after his death, Caligula became a symbol. To Romans, his name was a warning. What happens when unchecked power meets a broken mind? To later historians, he was the embodiment of the dangers of tyranny. Even today, his story fascinates us. Is he truly insane, or just dangerously theatrical? Is he a victim of propaganda, or a ruler who lost himself in the illusions of godhood? One thing is certain: Caligula's reign, though short, left scars on Rome that lasted far longer than his 4 years in power. Picture this: the young boy once called Caligula Little Boots, a child adored by soldiers. Growing up in a world of betrayal and blood, he rose to the highest throne on earth, embraced as Rome's golden prince. And yet within a few short years, he became the empire's nightmare, remembered not for glory, but for madness. Caligula's story is not just about Rome. It is about power itself, how it can corrupt, how it can destroy, and how even gods can fall when their people turn against them.